The autumn rain had been falling steadily for 3 hours when Marcus Thompson pulled his black sedan into the gas station just outside Millbrook, Tennessee. The windshield wipers squeaked against the glass as he turned off the engine, their rhythmic motion finally coming to rest. He sat for a moment watching the raindrops race down the windshield, each drop catching the neon light from the gas station sign above. Marcus was tired, the kind of tired that settles deep in your bones after driving for 8 straight hours. He had been on the road since dawn, making his way from Memphis to Nashville for what would be another difficult case. At 42 years old, he had seen enough in his 15 years as a U.S. Marshal to know that some jobs never got easier, no matter how much experience you gained. He stepped out of the car, feeling the cool October air hit his face. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, but the parking lot was still slick with water that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights from inside the convenience store. Marcus stretched his arms above his head, working out the kinks from hours of sitting behind the wheel. His dark suit was wrinkled from the long drive, and he could feel the weight of his service weapon concealed beneath his jacket. The gas station was one of those old-fashioned places that looked like it had been frozen in time since the late 1980s. The building was small and rectangular, with faded yellow paint and a hand-painted sign that read, "Bucks Gas and Go." There were only 4 pumps, all of them the older style without digital displays or credit card readers. Inside, Marcus could see an elderly white man behind the counter, his gray hair slicked back and his eyes focused on a small television mounted on the wall. Marcus walked to the pump and began filling his tank, the smell of gasoline mixing with the earthy scent of rain on asphalt. He noticed a pickup truck parked near the store entrance, its engine running and country music drifting from the open windows. 2 men sat inside, both wearing baseball caps and flannel shirts. They had been watching him since he arrived, their conversation stopping the moment he stepped out of his car. The pump clicked off automatically when the tank was full, and Marcus replaced the nozzle before heading into the store. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and the old man behind the counter looked up from his television. The store smelled of coffee that had been sitting too long and the sweet scent of packaged pastries. "Evening," Marcus said politely, grabbing a bottle of water from the refrigerated section and a bag of trail mix from one of the aisles. The old man nodded but didn't return the greeting. His eyes followed Marcus as he moved through the store, and there was something in his expression that Marcus had seen too many times before. It was a look that made assumptions, that judged without knowing, that saw only the color of his skin rather than the person wearing it. Marcus had learned long ago not to let such looks bother him. He had grown up in Detroit, where he had experienced both overt racism and the more subtle kind that hid behind polite smiles and careful words. His grandmother had taught him to hold his head high and treat everyone with respect, regardless of how they treated him. "You can't control how people see you," she used to say, "but you can control how you see yourself." He approached the counter with his items, reaching for his wallet. The old man rang up the purchases without making eye contact, his movements quick and efficient. The total came to $6.43. "That'll be $6.43, the old man said, his voice flat and unwelcoming. Marcus handed him a $10 bill and waited for his change. Through the window he could see that the pickup truck was still there, its occupants still watching. One of them had gotten out and was leaning against the side of the vehicle, his arms crossed and his expression hostile. The old man handed Marcus his change without counting it out loud, clearly wanting the transaction to end as quickly as possible. Marcus pocketed the money and turned toward the door, but as he reached for the handle, he heard the bell chime again behind him. The 2 men from the pickup truck had entered the store. They were both in their 30s with the kind of weathered faces that came from years of outdoor work. The taller one had a thick beard and suspicious eyes that immediately fixed on Marcus. The shorter one wore a Confederate flag patch on his jacket sleeve and had a toothpick hanging from the corner of his mouth. Well, the bearded man said loudly, his voice carrying a distinct southern drawl. "Look what we got here, Jimmy. Fancy car, fancy clothes. Must be one of them big city boys come slumming in our little town." Marcus felt the familiar tension that always preceded trouble. He had been in situations like this before, and he knew that the best course of action was usually to leave quickly and quietly. But something in the man's tone, something in the way both men had positioned themselves between him and the door, told him that leaving might not be as simple as he hoped. "Just passing through," Marcus said calmly. keeping his voice steady and non-confrontational. "Not looking for any trouble?" The shorter man, Jimmy, laughed and shook his head. "That's what they all say, ain't it, Dale? Just passing through. But somehow they always seem to bring trouble with them wherever they go." Dale, the bearded man, took a step closer to Marcus. "You know, friend, we don't get many of your kind around here. Most folks who look like you know better than to stop in Millbrook after dark. Makes a person wonder what you're really doing here." The old man behind the counter had turned up the volume on his television and was pointedly ignoring the confrontation unfolding in his store. Marcus realized that he would get no help from that quarter. He glanced toward the window and saw that the parking lot was empty except for the 3 vehicles. No witnesses, no one to intervene if things went badly. Marcus had faced down armed fugitives and dangerous criminals in his career, but there was something particularly unsettling about this kind of confrontation. These men weren't criminals in the traditional sense. They were just ordinary people whose prejudices had been allowed to fester and grow until they felt justified in intimidating anyone who didn't look like them. "I told you, I'm just passing through," Marcus repeated, his hand instinctively moving toward his jacket. "I filled up my car, bought some snacks, and now I'm leaving. That's all." But even as he spoke, Marcus could see that the situation was escalating beyond the point of simple intimidation. The 2 men were positioning themselves more aggressively, and there was something in their eyes that suggested they had done this before. Dale stepped even closer, close enough that Marcus could smell the beer on his breath and see the yellowed teeth behind his sneering grin. Jimmy had moved to block the door completely, his hand resting on something in his back pocket. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, casting harsh shadows across their faces and making the whole scene feel surreal and threatening. "See? That's where you're wrong, boy," Dale said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You ain't just passing through. You're in our town now, and that means you follow our rules. First rule is respect. Second rule is knowing your place." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but his training kicked in automatically. Years of experience had taught him to stay calm under pressure, to assess threats quickly and respond appropriately. He scanned the store, noting possible exits and weapons. The back door was probably locked, and the front was blocked. There were bottles and cans on the shelves that could serve as improvised weapons if necessary. But he hoped it wouldn't come to that. "I'm not looking for trouble," Marcus said again, his voice remaining steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "I just want to get back on the road." Jimmy laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the store's walls. "Oh, you're gonna get back on the road, all right. But first, we're gonna have ourselves a little conversation about respect and proper behavior." The old man behind the counter finally looked up from his television, but instead of showing concern or calling for help, he simply shook his head and muttered something under his breath. It was clear that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened in his store, and equally clear that he had no intention of intervening. Dale reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a cell phone, holding it up so Marcus could see the screen. "You know what this is? This here's a direct line to Sheriff Hawkins. Me and Jimmy, we're what you might call unofficial deputies. We help keep the peace around here, make sure undesirables don't cause problems for decent folks." Marcus knew the type. Small-town bullies who thought a connection to local law enforcement gave them the right to harass anyone they didn't like. He had encountered similar situations before, usually in rural areas where the police were either sympathetic to such behavior or simply looked the other way. "Now," Dale continued, "Sheriff Hawkins is going to want to know why someone like you is driving through our town in an expensive car. Might want to run your plates, check if maybe that vehicle's been reported stolen. Amazing how many stolen cars seem to end up in the hands of people who can't afford them." The implied threat was clear. They would use their local connections to make Marcus's life difficult, possibly even fabricate charges if he didn't submit to their intimidation. It was a tactic he had seen before, and one that unfortunately still worked in many parts of the country. Jimmy pulled his hand from his back pocket, revealing a folding knife that he began to clean under his fingernails. "Of course, we might be willing to forget we ever saw you depending on how cooperative you are. All we want is a little respect, maybe a small donation to our local charity fund, so that was it." Extortion disguised as community policing. Marcus had seen this playbook too many times to count. They would threaten him with false charges or violence until he paid them money to leave him alone. Probably worked on most people who just wanted to avoid trouble and get on with their lives. "How much?" Marcus asked quietly, playing along while he considered his options. Dale's grin widened. Well, now that depends on a lot of factors. Nice car like that? Fancy suit, you're obviously doing well for yourself. I'd say a couple hundred ought to cover it. Call it a road tax. Marcus nodded slowly, reaching for his wallet again. Both men relaxed slightly, thinking they had won. But as his hand moved inside his jacket, Marcus made a decision. He was tired of running from bullies, tired of paying extortion to avoid confrontation, tired of letting fear dictate his actions. Instead of his wallet, his hand found his credentials. "You know what?" Marcus said, his voice taking on a different tone. "I think I'll pass on your road tax." Dale's expression darkened. "That's not really an option, boy. See, you don't understand how things work around here. We're offering you a chance to leave quietly and peacefully. You really don't want to see what happens if you refuse." Jimmy stepped forward, the knife now clearly visible in his hand. "Maybe you need a little convincing. Help you understand the seriousness of the situation." The old man behind the counter finally spoke up, but not to help Marcus. "Y'all take this outside," he said gruffly. "I don't want blood on my floors." Marcus felt a cold anger building in his chest. These men thought they could intimidate him because of his race, thought they could extort money from him because he was alone and outnumbered. They had no idea who they were dealing with, no concept of the authority he carried or the training he possessed. Dale reached for his phone again. "Last chance, boy. Pay up or I call Sheriff Hawkins and tell him we caught ourselves a car thief. Your word against ours. And guess whose word carries more weight in this county?" Jimmy moved closer, the knife now held in a threatening position. "Maybe we search him first, Dale. See what else he might be carrying. Could be drugs, could be stolen goods. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look." The situation had escalated beyond the point of peaceful resolution. Marcus could see the malice in their eyes, the confidence that came from years of getting away with such behavior. They thought they held all the cards, thought they had him cornered and helpless. They were about to learn otherwise. Marcus straightened to his full height, his demeanor shifting from passive to authoritative. The change was subtle but unmistakable, like a switch being thrown. His shoulders squared, his jaw set, and his eyes hardened with the kind of resolve that came from years of facing down dangerous criminals. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice now carrying the weight of authority. "I'm afraid you've made a serious mistake," Dale sneered. "The only mistake here is yours, thinking you can—" Marcus's hand emerged from his jacket, but instead of a wallet or a weapon, he held a leather credential case. With a quick flip of his wrist, he opened it to reveal a gold badge and identification card. "United States Marshal Marcus Thompson," he said clearly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "And you two are now interfering with a federal officer." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Dale's face went white and he stumbled backward as if he had been struck. Jimmy's knife clattered to the floor as his hand went limp with shock. Even the old man behind the counter looked up from his television, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. The silence in the convenience store was deafening. The only sounds were the humming of the refrigerators and the distant rumble of thunder outside. Dale stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the gold badge that gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Jimmy had taken several steps backward, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. Marcus kept his credentials visible, letting the weight of his authority sink in. He had seen this reaction before, the moment when bullies realized they had picked the wrong target, when their false bravado crumbled in the face of real power. It was always satisfying, but particularly so in situations like this. You're really a U.S. Marshal?" Dale stammered, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. 15 years, Marcus replied calmly, closing his credential case and returning it to his jacket. "Based out of the Memphis office. Currently en route to Nashville on official business." The old man behind the counter had turned off his television and was now paying very close attention to the conversation. His earlier indifference had been replaced by obvious concern as he realized that his store had just become the scene of a potential federal incident. Jimmy picked up his knife with shaking hands and quickly folded it, shoving it back into his pocket. "Look, Marshal, sir, we didn't know. I mean, if we had known who you were, you would have what?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Treated me with respect? Is that only something you reserve for federal law enforcement officers?" Dale was frantically trying to think of a way out of the situation. "This is all just a big misunderstanding. We weren't really going to do anything. We were just having some fun, you know?" Small-town humor. Marcus stepped closer to Dale, close enough that the man could feel the authority radiating from him. Fun? You call extortion and intimidation fun? You call threatening someone with a knife fun? We never actually threatened you, Jimmy said desperately. I mean, I had the knife out, but I wasn't going to use it or nothing. It's just for show, you know? Conspiracy to commit extortion, Marcus said matter-of-factly. Intimidation of a federal officer. Possible civil rights violations. Those are serious federal crimes, gentlemen. The kind that can send you to federal prison for a very long time. The color drained completely from Dale's face. Federal prison? Come on now, Marshal, that's a bit extreme, don't you think? Like Jimmy said, we weren't really gonna hurt you. We were just messing around. Marcus pulled out his cell phone and both men tensed visibly. I should probably call this into the FBI field office in Nashville. They handle civil rights cases. I'm sure they'd be very interested to hear about two men who make a habit of extorting money from travelers based on their race. Please don't do that, Dale begged, his tough guy persona completely gone. Look, we're sorry, okay? We made a mistake. A big mistake. But calling the FBI, that's gonna ruin our lives. The old man behind the counter cleared his throat nervously. Marshal, sir, if I may. These boys, they ain't really bad people. They got some outdated ideas, if you know what I mean. Maybe this here's been enough of a lesson for them. Marcus looked at the old man with surprise. After remaining silent during the entire confrontation, he was now trying to intervene on behalf of the two men who had been terrorizing his store. So you're saying I should overlook federal crimes because they're not really bad people? Marcus asked. The old man shifted uncomfortably. I'm just saying maybe they learned their lesson. Sometimes a good scare is better than ruining someone's whole life. Jimmy nodded eagerly. He's right, Marshal. We definitely learned our lesson. This ain't ever gonna happen again, I swear on my mother's grave. Marcus studied the two men carefully. Dale was sweating profusely, and Jimmy looked like he might be sick. They were scared, genuinely scared, and that fear might indeed be enough to change their behavior. But Marcus had also seen too many bullies who promised to change their ways only to return to their old habits once the immediate threat was gone. You know what I think? Marcus said slowly. I think you two have been doing this for a long time. I think you've terrorized dozens of people who were just trying to pass through your town peacefully. I think you've stolen money from travelers who couldn't fight back and were too scared to report it. Dale started to protest, but Marcus held up a hand to silence him. I also think, Marcus continued, that the local sheriff probably knows exactly what you've been doing and either doesn't care or actively encourages it. The guilty looks on both men's faces confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't their first time, and it probably wasn't even their first time this month. Marcus put his phone away and crossed his arms. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me about every person you've extorted money from in the past year. Names, dates, amounts. Everything you can remember. We can't do that, Dale said weakly. I mean, we don't keep records or nothing. Then you're going to try very hard to remember, Marcus replied. Because the alternative is federal charges that will send you both to prison for the next 5 to 10 years. Jimmy looked like he was about to cry. Marshal, please. We got families. I got kids. Dale's got a sick wife. We can't go to prison. You should have thought about that before you decided to become criminals, Marcus said without sympathy. But I'm willing to make a deal with you. Both men perked up slightly at the mention of a deal. I'm going to give you exactly 1 week to turn yourselves into the FBI field office in Nashville. You're going to confess to everything you've done, and you're going to cooperate fully with their investigation. You're going to help them identify every person you've victimized, and you're going to make restitution for every dollar you've stolen. Dale and Jimmy exchanged panicked glances. And, Marcus continued, you're going to provide information about any other people in this county who might be engaged in similar activities, including any law enforcement officers who might be looking the other way. If we do all that, Dale asked hesitantly, what happens to us? Marcus shrugged. That's up to the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. But cooperation goes a long way toward reducing sentences. You might end up with probation instead of prison time, assuming you're genuinely committed to making things right. The old man behind the counter spoke up again. That seems fair, Marshal. More than fair considering what they'd done. Marcus ignored him and focused on the two men. Do we have a deal? Dale and Jimmy looked at each other with expressions of desperate hope mixed with fear. The gravity of their situation was finally sinking in, and they both understood that Marcus was offering them something they didn't deserve, a chance to avoid federal prison. "Yes," Dale said quickly, nodding his head vigorously. "Yes, we accept the deal. We'll do whatever you want us to do." Jimmy was equally eager to agree. "Absolutely, Marshal. We'll turn ourselves in. We'll cooperate. We'll do everything you said. Thank you for giving us this chance." Marcus studied their faces carefully, looking for signs of deception or false promises. He had dealt with enough criminals to know when someone was genuinely remorseful versus when they were simply saying what they thought he wanted to hear. In this case, their fear seemed genuine enough, and fear could be a powerful motivator for behavioral change. "Before you thank me," Marcus said sternly, "let me make something very clear. This isn't just about you two. This is about every person you've terrorized, every family you've extorted money from, every traveler who left this town feeling humiliated and violated. Your actions have consequences that go far beyond your own lives." He pulled out a business card and handed it to Dale. "This is the contact information for Special Agent Rebecca Chen at the FBI field office in Nashville. You will call her exactly 1 week from today and arrange to surrender yourselves. If you fail to do so, I will personally ensure that federal warrants are issued for your arrest." Dale took the card with trembling hands and stared at it as if it were a death sentence. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "I will be following up on this case personally. I have connections throughout federal law enforcement, and I will know if you try to run or if you fail to honor our agreement. There is nowhere in this country you can hide from federal authorities." The old man behind the counter had been listening intently to the entire conversation, and now he stepped forward hesitantly. "Marshal, if you don't mind me asking, what about us? I mean, me and my store? Are we going to be in trouble too?" Marcus turned his attention to the elderly store owner, noticing for the first time the fear in the man's eyes. "What's your name?" "Buck Morrison, sir. I own this place. Have for about 20 years now." "Well, Buck," Marcus said, "that depends on how much you knew about what these two were doing and how much you helped them do it." Buck's face reddened slightly. "I never helped them do nothing, Marshal. I just minded my own business. When they came in here with people, I figured it wasn't my place to get involved." "You figured it wasn't your place to prevent crimes from being committed in your store?" Marcus asked pointedly. "I'm just an old man trying to make a living," Buck said defensively. "I ain't no hero. Besides, Dale there is Sheriff Hawkins' nephew. Getting involved would have just brought trouble down on me." That piece of information confirmed Marcus's suspicions about local law enforcement. If Dale was related to the sheriff, it explained how they had been able to operate with impunity for so long. "So Sheriff Hawkins is your nephew?" Marcus asked Dale directly. Dale nodded miserably. "Yes, sir. My mom's brother. But he don't know nothing about what we've been doing, I swear." Marcus raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Really? His nephew and his nephew's friend have been extorting money from travelers for months or years, and the sheriff of this county has no idea." "Well," Dale started, then stopped, realizing that any answer would either implicate his uncle or reveal him as a liar. Marcus pulled out his phone again and began scrolling through his contacts. "I think I need to have a conversation with Sheriff Hawkins. I'm sure he'll be very interested to learn what his nephew has been up to." "Please don't call him tonight," Jimmy begged. "Let us talk to him first. Let us explain what happened." "Why?" Marcus asked. "So you can all get your story straight? So he can help you cover this up?" "No," Dale said desperately. "It ain't like that. Uncle Ray, he's a good man. He really don't know what we've been doing. If he did, he would have stopped us. But if you call him tonight without warning, it's gonna break his heart. And it might ruin his career too." Marcus considered this. He had no particular desire to destroy the career of a sheriff who might genuinely be innocent of wrongdoing. But he also couldn't allow the possibility of a cover-up or witness tampering. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said finally. "I'm going to give you exactly 24 hours to tell Sheriff Hawkins everything. If he contacts me within that time frame and we have an honest conversation about this situation, I might be willing to work with him to resolve it quietly. But if I don't hear from him, or if I get the impression that he's trying to cover anything up, this becomes a full federal investigation into corruption in this county." Both men nodded eagerly, grateful for any additional time to try to minimize the damage to their family. Marcus looked at Buck again. As for you, Mr. Morrison, I'm going to give you the same choice I gave them. You can cooperate fully with the federal investigation, or you can be charged as an accessory to their crimes. Buck's eyes widened. Accessory? But I never took any money from nobody. You provided the location where crimes were committed, Marcus explained. You remained silent while travelers were being extorted and threatened. In the eyes of the law, that can make you complicit. But what was I supposed to do? Buck protested. I'm 73 years old. I can't fight nobody. You could have called the state police, Marcus said. You could have reported it to the FBI. You had options, Mr. Morrison. You chose not to use them. The truth was that Marcus felt some sympathy for the old man. Buck Morrison was caught between his own safety and doing the right thing, and he had chosen self-preservation. It wasn't admirable, but it was understandable. Still, Marcus couldn't allow enablers to escape consequences entirely. However, Marcus continued, if you're willing to testify about what you've witnessed here, and if you're willing to help identify other victims who might have stopped at your store, I might be able to work something out with the prosecutor. Buck nodded vigorously. Yes, sir. I'll do whatever you need me to do. I got security cameras that might have caught some of it on video. This was unexpected good news. Video evidence would make prosecution much easier, and would corroborate the testimonies of any victims who came forward. Those cameras better still be working when the FBI gets here, Marcus warned, and the recordings better not mysteriously disappear. They won't, Buck assured him. I'll make sure of it. Marcus checked his watch. It was almost 10 o'clock, and he still had several hours of driving ahead of him if he wanted to reach Nashville tonight. But first he had one more task to complete. Marcus pulled out a small notebook and pen from his jacket pocket, the same ones he used for taking statements during fugitive apprehensions. Before I leave, I need some basic information from all of you. Names, addresses, phone numbers, everything. He spent the next 15 minutes collecting detailed contact information and taking preliminary statements from Dale, Jimmy, and Buck. He made careful notes about the timeline of events, the specific threats that were made, and the admission of past similar incidents. This preliminary documentation would be crucial for the FBI investigation that would follow. Now, Marcus said, closing his notebook, I want each of you to understand something very clearly. What happened here tonight is just the beginning, not the end. You've all admitted to serious crimes, and there will be consequences. The only question is how severe those consequences will be, and that depends entirely on how honest and cooperative you're going forward. Dale was still visibly shaking. Marshal, what should we tell our families? I mean, my wife, she don't know nothing about this. She's going to be devastated. Marcus felt no sympathy for Dale's domestic concerns. You should tell them the truth. You should explain that your actions have put your family's future at risk and that you're going to do everything in your power to make things right. Jimmy wiped sweat from his forehead with a dirty handkerchief. How many other people do you think will come forward? I mean, if this becomes public? That's not your concern, Marcus replied sharply. Your concern should be making sure you provide a complete and accurate list of everyone you've victimized. Don't make the mistake of thinking you can hide some incidents and only confess to others. We will find out. And when we do, any deal you've made will be void. Buck Morrison had been unusually quiet during the note-taking process, and Marcus could see that the old man was struggling with something. Mr. Morrison, is there something else you need to tell me? Buck hesitated for a long moment, then sighed heavily. There's other people involved, Marshal. Not just these two. There's a whole group of them that's been doing this kind of thing around the county. This revelation didn't surprise Marcus, but it did confirm his suspicions about the scope of the problem. Tell me about this group. It ain't really organized or nothing, Buck said carefully. It's just, well, there's certain people who think they got the right to hassle folks they don't like. Mostly it's black folks and Hispanic folks, but sometimes it's just people from up north or out west. Anyone who looks like they don't belong. Dale shot Buck a warning look, but the old man ignored him and continued talking. They got this idea that they're protecting the community, keeping out undesirable elements. But really, they're just bullies who like having power over people who can't fight back. Marcus made additional notes. How many people are we talking about? Maybe a dozen regular ones, Buck said. Plus others who help out sometimes when they think it's justified. Jimmy looked sick. Buck, you shouldn't be telling him this stuff. These people are our neighbors, our friends. These people are criminals, Marcus corrected. And now they're going to face justice just like you are. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming text message. He glanced at the screen and saw that it was from his supervisor in Memphis, asking for an update on his travel status. The reminder that he had official business to attend to in Nashville brought his focus back to the immediate situation. "I need to get back on the road," Marcus announced. "But before I leave, let me be absolutely clear about expectations. Mr. Morrison, you will secure those security camera recordings and make them available to federal investigators. Dale and Jimmy, you have 24 hours to confess everything to Sheriff Hawkins and 1 week to surrender to the FBI." He looked each man in the eye to make sure his message was understood. "If any of you try to run, if any of you try to destroy evidence, if any of you try to contact potential witnesses to intimidate them, you will face additional federal charges that will put you in prison for decades. Do I make myself clear?" All three men nodded silently. Marcus headed toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "One more thing. If I find out that any other travelers are harassed or extorted in this county between now and the resolution of this case, I will hold all of you personally responsible. Spread the word to your friends that their little reign of terror is over." As Marcus walked to his car, he could hear muted conversation breaking out inside the store. The three men were probably trying to figure out how to minimize the damage to themselves and their community. But Marcus knew that their options were extremely limited. Federal law enforcement didn't negotiate with criminals, and the evidence against them was overwhelming. He sat in his car for a moment before starting the engine, reflecting on what had just occurred. In his 15 years as a U.S. Marshal, Marcus had arrested murderers, bank robbers, and escaped convicts. He had been shot at, threatened, and faced down some of the most dangerous criminals in the country. But there was something particularly satisfying about tonight's confrontation. These weren't hardened criminals motivated by desperation or mental illness. They were ordinary people who had chosen to become predators, targeting innocent travelers based on nothing more than racial prejudice and perceived vulnerability. They represented everything that was wrong with certain parts of American society, and bringing them to justice felt like a victory for every person who had ever been victimized by such hatred. Marcus started his car and pulled out of the gas station parking lot, watching the three men through the store windows as they continued their worried conversation. He reached for his phone and dialed the number for Special Agent Rebecca Chen in Nashville. "Agent Chen, this is Marshal Marcus Thompson. I'm en route to Nashville, but I need to report an incident that just occurred in Millbrook County. We're going to need a full civil rights investigation." As he explained the situation to Agent Chen, Marcus found himself thinking about all the travelers who had been forced to endure what he had just experienced, except without the protection of a federal badge. How many people had been humiliated, robbed, and terrorized simply for being in the wrong place with the wrong skin color? Tonight, that pattern of abuse had finally been interrupted. But Marcus knew that the real work was just beginning. Building a federal case would take months, and ensuring that justice was served would require careful coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies. Still, for the first time in what was probably years, travelers passing through Millbrook County would be safe from the kind of harassment he had just experienced. That alone made the confrontation worthwhile. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in a conference room at the FBI field office in Nashville, reviewing the case files that had grown considerably since that night at Buck's Gas and Go. Special Agent Rebecca Chen sat across from him, surrounded by boxes of evidence and witness statements that painted a disturbing picture of systematic harassment and extortion in Millbrook County. 18 victims have come forward so far, Agent Chen reported, flipping through a stack of sworn affidavits. And we're expecting more. The local news coverage has encouraged people to contact us if they've had similar experiences in that area. Marcus nodded grimly. "What about the sheriff?" "Sheriff Raymond Hawkins contacted us exactly 23 hours after your encounter, just as you predicted," Chen said with a slight smile. He seemed genuinely shocked by his nephew's activities, though I suspect he had some idea that something was going on, and chose to look the other way. The sheriff's cooperation had been crucial to the investigation's success. Within hours of learning about his nephew's crimes, Hawkins had provided the FBI with names and contact information for other suspected participants in the harassment network. He had also agreed to step aside temporarily, while federal investigators examined his department's practices. Hawkins is facing an internal affairs investigation, and possible civil rights charges, Chen continued. But his cooperation has been valuable, and he seems genuinely committed to cleaning up his department. Marcus picked up one of the victim's statements and read it quietly. It was from a young Hispanic couple who had been traveling through Millbrook County on their honeymoon when they were stopped by Dale and two other men. They had been forced to pay $300 to avoid having their car impounded on false charges. "What about Dale and Jimmy?" Marcus asked. "They surrendered exactly 1 week after your encounter, just as promised," Chen said. "They've been fully cooperative and have provided us with detailed information about the entire network. 12 people have been arrested so far, with more arrests expected." The investigation had revealed a loose organization of local residents who targeted travelers they perceived as outsiders or undesirables. They operated with the implicit protection of certain members of the sheriff's department and had been emboldened by years of facing no consequences for their actions. "The interesting thing," Chen continued, "is that your encounter seems to have broken their confidence completely. Once word spread that a federal marshal had confronted Dale and Jimmy, several other victims contacted us voluntarily. People who had been too scared to report the incident suddenly felt safe coming forward." Marcus understood this phenomenon. Bullies relied on their victims feeling powerless and isolated. Once that dynamic was broken, once people realized that there were consequences for such behavior, the entire system of intimidation began to collapse. "What kind of sentences are we looking at?" Marcus asked. Chen consulted her notes. "Dale and Jimmy are facing federal charges for conspiracy, extortion, and civil rights violations. Given their cooperation and the fact that they're first-time federal offenders, they'll probably get 18 months to 2 years in federal prison, followed by probation." It wasn't as much time as Marcus would have preferred, but it was significant enough to serve as a deterrent to others. More importantly, the federal charges would follow them for the rest of their lives, making it difficult for them to find employment or housing in the future. "The other participants are looking at similar sentences depending on their level of involvement," Chen added. "A few of the ringleaders might get longer terms." Marcus picked up another file, this one containing Buck Morrison's statement and the security camera footage from his store. The recordings had indeed captured several incidents of harassment and extortion, providing crucial video evidence for the prosecution. "What about Morrison?" "He's been incredibly cooperative," Chen said. "The security footage he provided has been invaluable, and he's agreed to testify against the others. Given his age and his willingness to help, we've agreed to let him plead to a misdemeanor charge with probation." Marcus felt that was appropriate. While Buck's silence had enabled the crimes to continue, he wasn't an active participant, and his cooperation had been essential to building the case. Chen leaned back in her chair and studied Marcus thoughtfully. "You know, this case has become something of a legend around here. A lone federal marshal walking into a hostile situation and single-handedly breaking up a civil rights conspiracy with nothing but his badge and his authority." Marcus shrugged. "I was just doing my job. Any law enforcement officer would have done the same thing." "Maybe," Chen said, "but not every officer would have handled it so perfectly. You could have arrested them on the spot and been done with it. Instead, you used the situation to uncover a much larger problem and bring justice to dozens of victims." The truth was that Marcus took no pleasure in destroying people's lives, even when they deserved it. But he also understood that sometimes dramatic action was necessary to prevent future crimes and protect innocent people. "Have there been any more incidents in Millbrook County?" Marcus asked. "None reported," Chen said. "Sheriff Hawkins has made it clear to everyone in the county that federal authorities are watching, and that any further harassment of travelers will result in immediate arrest. The word seems to have gotten out." Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Nashville skyline. Somewhere out there, travelers were driving through Tennessee without fear of being harassed or extorted simply because of their race or appearance. That knowledge made all the paperwork and legal proceedings worthwhile. "There's one more thing," Chen said, pulling out a folder marked with Marcus's name. "The victims have asked us to pass along their thanks. Several of them wanted to contact you directly. but we explained that wouldn't be appropriate during an ongoing investigation. Marcus opened the folder and found it filled with handwritten letters from people whose lives had been affected by the crimes in Millbrook County. They thanked him not just for solving their individual cases, but for giving them back their faith in the justice system. One letter was from the young Hispanic couple who had been extorted on their honeymoon. They wrote that the incident had nearly ruined their trip and left them feeling violated and helpless. Learning that their attackers had been arrested and would face federal charges had restored their belief that America was a place where all people could travel freely and safely. Another letter was from an elderly black man who had been traveling to his grandson's graduation when he was stopped and humiliated by members of the harassment network. He wrote that he had been afraid to drive through rural areas ever since, but that knowing the perpetrators were in federal prison had given him back his confidence to travel. Marcus read each letter carefully, understanding that these people represented hundreds of others who had suffered similar experiences throughout the country. His actions in that gas station had protected not just future travelers through Millbrook County, but had sent a message to potential perpetrators everywhere that such behavior would not be tolerated. 6 months later, Marcus received a final update on the case. All 12 defendants had been convicted on federal charges and were serving prison sentences ranging from 18 months to 4 years. Sheriff Hawkins had resigned from his position and was facing federal charges of his own, though his cooperation had earned him a reduced sentence. Buck Morrison had closed his gas station and moved to Florida to live with his daughter. He had testified at every trial, helping to ensure that justice was served for all the victims. Most importantly, there had been no reported incidents of traveler harassment in Millbrook County since that night. The message had been received, understood, and heeded. As Marcus filed away the final paperwork, he reflected on how a simple stop for gas had turned into one of the most significant cases of his career. It served as a reminder that federal law enforcement officers never truly went off duty, and that sometimes the most important work happened when you least expected it. The gold badge he carried represented more than just his authority as a U.S. Marshal. It represented the promise that all Americans, regardless of race or background, had the right to travel freely and safely throughout their own country. That night in Millbrook County, that promise had been tested and upheld. And for Marcus Thompson, that was enough.